Thank you all for coming today. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the quarter and of the year, Professor Hod Lipson from Cornell University. He's with the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department as well as Computing and Information Systems. He's the director of the Creative Machines Laboratory, where he and his students and colleagues work on novel ways to automate design. He's worked in evolutionary robotics, multi-material rapid prototyping. I first met Hod just about a half a year ago at a conference in England where he gave a talk that I was so absolutely enchanted by that I just had to bring him back here so you could be enchanted as well. So please welcome our speaker, Hod Lipson.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. What I'd like to talk about is this idea which has recently been called the robotic scientist. It's machines that do experiments, come up with hypotheses, generate models, and basically do science. But I won't start by talking about how it works and why, but rather I'd like to tell you the story of how we got there. What we did, we didn't set out to make these kinds of machines, but rather it was a kind of long path that started with our interest in robotics. So about, I guess, more than a decade now, I became interested in this idea of robotics from the point of view of design and automation. Can we design better robots, really? And if you think about it, there are millions of robots out there today doing lots of things, and they're very good. They're very fast. They're very precise. They're very powerful. They work 24/7, but they lack in one ability, and that is their ability to adapt to new situations. So a robot like this that works in a factory is superhuman in all of these aspects, but it can't deal with if something is in the wrong place or in the wrong time, or if a bolt falls off of this robot, it's kind of game over. Now, when you look at biology, on the other hand, biology is very adaptive, and it's not as powerful, not as fast, not as precise, but biology can deal with unforeseen situations, and adaptation is key. So what can we learn from biology in making more adaptive robotics? And that's really one of the biggest frontiers in robotics research today is making these adaptive systems. So about a decade ago, we started looking at this idea of designing robots using evolution, ideas inspired from biological evolution. And so one of the first experiments was to try to to create a big vat of robot components, bars, neurons, wires, batteries, everything that is necessary, put them in a big primordial soup and evolve structures. So, of course, we did that in simulation. We did it in a big gaming simulator. That was back in 1999, so we had to write our own gaming simulator. It ran on a 16 processor Onyx machine. Today, you can probably run it on your cell phone. And it gradually evolved these interesting machines, which we kind of bred for the task of crawling on the infinite plane. So you can see here two of these machines. The one on the right looks almost like it was intelligently designed. It has this kind of nice symmetry to it. It wiggles its tail, and it crawls across this floor. But we went one step forward and actually made these robots. And here you can see two of these robots crawling across the floor. These were 3D printed. That was kind of relatively new technology at the time, and we kind of copied these machines from the virtual world into the physical world and made them walk in reality. So these are fairly simple robots by any means, but what's interesting about them is that they weren't designed explicitly by engineers sitting at a desk and deciding how to put things together and how to program them, but rather they were bred starting from a bunch of building blocks and a kind of high-level goal, and can we get these interesting results. So that was this experiment, and that experiment was something we did at Brandeis University back in 2000. And this is what got me my faculty position at Cornell. But I knew there was no way I'm going to get tenure making plastic robots, mechanical engineering. We had to make a robot that's made of titanium. So we built another robot. This one is actually aluminum, but you can't tell the difference. And it was much more complicated, much more difficult to control, much more challenging. And if you look at this robot here, you can see it has 12 pneumatic actuators. It has a paintball canister in the center. And it has these kind of 12 valves at the front. And these valves redirect the air pressure from the canister into the pneumatic actuators, and to make it move in an interesting way. Now, this is a really interesting control problem because it's more of a time force control rather than a position control. It's more tricky to make this thing work, but it's a much more powerful robot. So this robot, in principle, can jump up in the air and do loops and lots of things. There's a lot of power density in this compressed air. And so I was really hoping that using these evolutionary techniques, we'll be able to make this robot gallop in the fields, literally. So the idea was to use the same technique. So this time, we put this robot in a big cage. There's a camera at the top left that watches this robot. In fact, it's just watching this red dot here. You can see the camera view at the top right. And as this robot learns to walk, the camera gives it feedback. Now, what we're doing here is this time we are evolving robot controllers. Each controller opens and closes the valves in certain ways. And the idea is to let a lot of controllers take rides on this robot, it's virtually like a rodeo show. And then the better controllers get to cross-breed with other controllers to produce new controllers with slight variations. And the idea is that over time, in testing this process, we'll get better and better machines. So kind of leave this overnight. Actually, under the stage here, at the bottom, there's a student that pulls back the robot every time it gets stuck in the corner. But generally, it's more or less automatic and runs by itself. So we leave this thing running and come back the next day to see what we have. So actually, the student that was underneath here had some time to think about better ways to do it, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But we ran this, and actually there's no audio playing. Maybe there's some audio control somewhere.
This is the random species. Then this one is a bit better.
I know, maybe there's some audio level control there. But here you can see the robot learning. It's beginning to... Oh, my bad.
7
no.
meters.
No, come on.
Oh, for goodness sake. You see, they get better and better.
There you go.
Okay. You know how to get sound?
Okay, so here's the...
sequence of...
okay, so here's the robot playing back some of its learned behaviors.
The random species.
Some of the... so you see at the beginning it's not doing very well. And gradually, after doing a couple of these kind of learning iterations, it's learning how to walk. And you can see here how it's moving along. But we're not going to take over the world anytime soon with this one. It's a bit disappointing because this, like I said, this robot is in principle capable of jumping in the air and really galloping. But the kind of behaviors that we got out of this robot aren't what we were looking for. We're really hoping to see something better than that. So time is running out. I'm in my third year. I really need to produce something that's going to dazzle my colleagues who are designing these things using more traditional methods and getting better results. So what can we do? So let's pause for a moment and see what the two processes are. So the first project I showed you, we designed these robots in simulation. We built this fancy gaming simulator. We evolved the robots in the simulation. Then we took the best robot that we had. We built it in reality, and it worked. But it only worked because it was a very simple robot that was easy to simulate. But in general, and as any engineer knows, the more complex the dynamics, the more difficult it is to simulate it realistically. And this gap between simulation and reality widens the more as complexity rises, and that gap is very difficult to cross. So this approach doesn't really scale as with the complexity of the system. The second project that I showed you, there was no simulation at all. We did everything on a physical robot. So we kind of sidestepped this issue of simulating complex systems. But here the challenge was that everything, that it was just too slow to simulate. There's only there's a limit to how many runs and simulations you can do overnight. It's slow. It's expensive. It wears out the robot. There's a lot of reasons why this wouldn't scale to complex systems either. And so we stuck between these two places. Even when we do it in simulation, it doesn't cross into reality, or we do it in reality and it's too slow. What do we do? So the third approach, which we'll see in a minute, is a kind of hybrid idea. And the idea is that we start off with a simulator. And I'm putting the word simulator in quotes because we're going to start with a bad simulator, a simulator that's not very accurate. And we're going to use it to evolve robots. Now, because the simulator is not very good, the robots that we're going to get are not going to be particularly good in reality. But we're going to take the best one that we have, we're going to run it, and we're going to collect data, even though it's not a good robot. And that data will basically tell us about this relationship between actuation and sensation. Basically, the motor commands and what kind of sensations they cause the robot. Let's say motor commands versus accelerations that the robot felt, actuation and sensation. And from that data set, we can now evolve better simulators. Just like we were evolving robots before, we now also evolve simulators. And the figure of merit of a simulator is how well it retrospectively explains the relationship between actuation and sensation of the robot. In other words, how well it simulates the world and the robot itself and predicts its behavior. So we generate better and better simulators. We then take the best simulator that we have. We evolved robots in that simulator. We take the best robot. We build it again. It's only the second robot that we're trying out. We collect more data. We improve the simulators yet again. And we're doing this cycle over and over again until we get better machines. In other words, we're co-evolving two things now. We're not just evolving robots in a fixed environment, but we are co-evolving robots and simulators at the same time. And this co-evolutionary relationship is somewhat like a predator-prey, maybe a teacher-student kind of relationship where they kind of help. There's a kind of a teaching element involved here. So that's the basic idea, and we tried it on this robot. So this is a third robot. This is a four-legged machine. It has 8 motors, 2 on each leg, 1 at the hip and 1 on the knee. And it also has 2 tilt sensors that tell it how it's tilted left and right, forward and backwards. So this robot needs to learn how to walk. But what's interesting about this robot is that it has no clue what it looks like. It doesn't know if it's a snake, if it's a spider, if it's a tree. It doesn't know how these 8 motors are connected to each other. What is the topology and the metrics of this particular morphology? So to understand what that means, imagine yourself for a minute sitting in a black box with no windows, and all you have are 8 knobs in front of you. And as you move these, you turn these 8 knobs, the box tilts left and right, forward and backwards. And from that relationship, you need to figure out how to make this box move as fast as possible. So, of course, you could do trial and error, but that won't get you very far. Is there a better way? So we're going to take basically the idea that I just described and try to implement it on this robot. So we start off with the robot. It's going to do some random motions, randomly actuate its motors, and then it's going to sense the tilt angles as it's actuating these motors. And from this relationship of actuation and sensation, it will begin creating self-models, okay, which it can then gradually improve over time. So you'll see this in a movie in a minute. For example, there's models at the top left. And you'll see this in a movie, and you'll know that all the models it initially creates of itself are wrong. But you will know that only because you happen to know what the real robot looks like. But insofar as the robot knows, these will all be valid hypotheses about what it actually is. the next step, and that's the critical step, it will take these models and try to figure out what action causes the most disagreement between predictions of these models. Okay, why the most disagreement? It's like a scientist designing an experiment that causes the most disagreement between competing theories, because then the result from those experiments will refute at least one of those theories. So we'll find out what's the action that caused the most disagreement in the green box. We'll then do that action, and that will be the second phase, second cycle, and get that information, refute some of the models, improve others, and keep on going in a cycle until all the models in the yellow box converge. At that point, it will switch to the blue box, where it will try to find a pattern that, say, makes it move forward. And because the models are pretty close to reality, what makes the model move forward will make the robot move forward as well. So here's an example of what this robot does. Here's one of our first ones. You know, when you're doing robotics, you always have the camera rolling, because it might be the last time the robot works. So you can see here the robot unplugged itself. Okay, so that's so much for that exploration. So we hooked it up again. We tamed it down a little bit, and here's one of the successful ones. So you can see here the robot is doing a small random motion, and here all the models it's creating of itself. They're all wrong, but they all cause the block in the center to tilt in the same way. So insofar as the robot knows, these are valid hypotheses about what it actually looks like. This is the 8th out of 16 trials. It's beginning to figure out it has 4 legs, but doesn't quite know how they're configured. And this is the 16th out of 16 trials, and it pretty much figured out it has 4 legs and how they're connected. It doesn't quite know where they are connected and how, but it's pretty close to reality. It then uses that model to figure out how to move. And we were hoping to get a kind of evil spidery walk, but instead we got this lame way of moving forward. Okay, so I don't know why the video is stuttering, but here you can see kind of the basic idea. So when you look at this robot, you have to remember that it did not have models of itself. It did not wasn't programmed to move, nor did it have did it do any trials of walking before this, right? So we basically bypassed this process to try to basically bridge this dichotomy. We then did something very cruel. We chopped off a leg of the robot and watch what happened. Don't worry, we put it back. The robot is happily retired now. But here you can see what when the leg is removed, the robot, after about a day, its self-image also loses a leg. And you can see here the robot with its short, it doesn't quite lose it, it just makes it a bit short. And here it is moving without a leg. And again, there's probably better ways to move without a leg than this. But the idea is that it wasn't the case that we had a sensor that said leg came off, switch to plan B. But really what happened, the leg came off, therefore the dynamics changed, therefore the self-image changed, therefore the behavior changed, right? So we were all about this idea of adaptation, remember, to begin with, and here it is happening. So that's this robot moving without a leg in different ways. And somebody told me it's kind of interesting to look at this. There's something organic about this robot that looks like it's really trying to move, right? So you know, when your car breaks down, it doesn't really try to keep on keeping on, right? It just breaks down. But there's something organic about, lifelike about a machine that really kind of appears to try to move in different ways to compensate for its damage. So that was kind of what this robot did. And just to give you some statistics, here are 30 independent runs. In these 30 runs, the robot starts at the origin at the top. If you use a random controller, the robot ends up at where the red dots are, for reference. But if you use this process, the blue dots are where the robot ends up using this controller that it evolved in physical reality, but the black dots are where the robot thought it's going to end up using its self-image. So what you can see here is that, like anything else in academia, This robot has an inflated self-image that it thinks is going to get about twice as far as it actually gets. But nevertheless, that self-image does allow it to make the right kind of decisions, right? And so it's interesting. I gave a talk about this in social science, and people are asking, is it better to have an inflated self-image or a deflated self-image, and what are the consequences? And it's interesting to examine these questions on this kind of transparent and simplified system. I gave a talk about this in a neuroscience conference, and people are asking, does the robot ever create phantom limbs? Does it think it has a model? What if its model is wrong? To what degree can it recover from it, and so forth? So there's a lot of interesting windows into human behavior and disorders that we can look at through this system. There's also interesting psychology that you can start doing. So here's what we're doing now is we're looking at robots that are not just modeling themselves, but robots that are modeling other robots simply by looking at them. Not by communicating in Bluetooth all the details, but actually observing other robots and trying to infer what they can do, what they can't do, what are they thinking, what is their controller doing based on how they're behaving, and so forth. This is kind of close to theory of mind in psychology. And ultimately, the really interesting thing is to have a robot basically model itself, but not its mechanics, but model its own thinking and moving into kind of metacognitive abilities, thinking about thinking, learning to learn, and so forth. But I'm not going to talk about any of that. What I really want to talk about is what happened next. So we built this robot, and it learned how to move, and everything was nice. And then a new student came into the lab and said, let's take that algorithm out of the robot and see what else it can model. If it modeled the robot's mechanics, let's see if it can model other things. So what we're going to do is basically we're going to take that algorithm that I just showed you and strip away the robot and replace the robot with some arbitrary experimental system. So here's a experimental system instead of the robot. Instead of motor commands and sensors, we're going to have various actuators, various knobs you can turn in the experiment, and you can, instead of measuring accelerations, we're going to measure various outputs from this robot. We're going to take this input and output and now evolve models. But instead of evolving models made out of robot pieces, we're going to evolve robots made out of some other kind of modeling language, let's say mathematical models. So literally we're going to use pieces of equations, plus, minus, divide, multiply, open brackets, close brackets, and so forth. And we're going to try to we are going to evolve lots of models to explain the data, and the next step would be to try out, to figure out how to turn the knobs to cause the most disagreement between these models. Okay, in the same way, we find the thing that causes the most disagreement, we then move back to the physical system, do an experiment, get some more data, improve models, refute others, and do this in a cycle. And hopefully, we'll get a model of the experimental system. So the first system I tried this on was actually this bridge. This is a bridge I cross every morning when I walk into Cornell. And when you walk across this bridge, you have some time to wonder what would happen if something wouldn't be as strong as it needs to be. And so so we actually took this bridge in simulation and applied this thing. So I'm showing this because often people think, oh, this is just for dynamical robots and things, but here's a very static structure. What we do is we simulate this structure, and we put one element at the top left there that's a bit weaker than it needs to be. And when we have our small vibrators on the bridge that vibrated very subtly and sense vibrations in other locations, and from that relationship between actuation and sensation, the machine creates lots of models of the bridge. The bridge creates models of itself, and then figures out how to vibrate again to cause disagreement between predictions of these models. And we could show that we could find the weak element a lot faster and more accurately than traditional civil engineering methods. So this is just an example of structural identification using this kind of active learning approach. But I want to focus on the rest of this talk on this application to actually evolving mathematical models. So let me and before we do that, I have to for a moment explain this technique called symbolic regression. So so you all are probably familiar with regression techniques, linear regression, nonlinear regression. In all these techniques, the expert provides a model, a mathematical model, and then usually the computer fine-tunes the coefficients of these models to fit the data. It could be a linear model, it could be a nonlinear model, but it's always the model comes from the expert, and the computer does the fine-tuning. So in symbolic regression, we don't even know what the model is. Okay, we start off with some data, we want to find what the model is, and we don't necessarily care about the coefficients. So here's an example. Let's look at this data set here. Can anybody tell me what is the model that generated this data based on basic mathematical functions that you're familiar with? It's not a rhetoric question. Did I hear sine x? What? Times x. Okay, that's pretty good. This particular data is an exponent times sine, and if you look at this data, if you're trying to do this in your head, you were trying to do symbolic regression because you had familiarity with some basic building blocks of mathematical functions. You didn't care about coefficients, but you qualitatively wanted to know how to put these building blocks together to explain the function. So that's the idea of symbolic regression. So what we're going to do now is instead of evolving robots, we're going to evolve equations. So we represent equation, let's say, as parse trees like this here. This particular tree represents the function x1 minus 3 times sine of x2 minus 7. So this is a tree. And now we're going to evolve these trees, crossbreed them, move branches from one tree to another, and gradually evolve trees to fit the data. So let's say we have some data in the beginning. They won't fit the data very well. And after a couple of generations, the equations will become better and better. So that's the idea of symbolic regression. It's been around since early 90s, so for more than 2 decades. But it never caught on. And why didn't it catch on? For 2 main reasons. One is that it's very computationally expensive because you have to test every model against all your data, so it's takes a long time. And the second reason, which is very common to all machine learning methods, is that it tends to overfit the data. And you get these bloated, large equations that overfit the data, and it's difficult to get out of it. So, and so that's very typical, and you can do all kind of penalties for size and so forth. It gets more complicated, but never kind of took off. So what we did is we basically applied this idea of coevolution to this modeling process. So here's how it works. We still have models that try to fit the data on the left. But in addition, and this is a critical step, instead of measuring the performance of each model on the entire data set, we only measure the performance over a couple of points, maybe 8 points. But these points move around to where these models disagree in their predictions. Okay, so that causes 2 things. First, we're not measuring over the entire data set, so it's a lot faster. We're only measuring over 8 points. So even if you have a gigabyte of data, it's still 8 points that move around. And the second thing is that it tends not to overfit because models that overfit are bad predictors, and therefore they tend to disagree in their predictions, and the point move right there and take care of it. So just to give you an idea, here's that function that you were trying to do in your head. If we let the system run on it using the entire data set, it kind of finds a solution gradually. But if you use a co-evolved data set, it finds a solution more accurately and faster. It takes longer to learn because to get started because it's finding where these points should be, but it eventually does it a lot faster. And the other curves there are comparisons if you only have a random subsample. So if you're thinking that it's just a subsampling, it's not that. The coevolution part is really critical to make this work. But what's even more interesting, this is the size of the solution. So you can see when you use the entire data set, you get large solutions that explain the data. And when you use co-evolved data set, you get much smaller, much more compact solution. And this is interesting. Often people ask, well, do you have a penalty for making the solution simpler? And we don't. It's merely the fact that the points are co-evolving creates a pressure for lean solutions. All right, so what do we do with this? First thing we did is try to predict the stock market. Now, why not? We spent a month trying to do that. I'm still here, so it didn't work. It did work for other people. I can tell you later how. But for us, it didn't work. So we thought, okay, let's do something else. Let's punch in all the prime numbers and see if we can find a formula for the prime numbers. We waited for a month, and we didn't get the formula for that either. And we got some well-known approximations, but nothing that's accurate. So seeing that we're not going to get rich or famous, we said, okay, let's write some proposals. Let's see what we can do. So we published this, and immediately I got an email from CERN, from Particle Accelerator in Geneva, and they said, we have some data that you might be interested in. We have a gap between mass and energy. I don't quite understand. We have 3,000 data points. Maybe you can find the formula that explains this gap. We punch in the numbers, we hit enter, and after a couple of hours, the machine comes back with this beautiful formula. So, and it explains the gap to 3 digits. So we were very excited. We sent an email over. We said we have the solution. We're already looking at flights to Stockholm and getting very excited. But they immediately sent an email back and said, we already know about this formula. It's called the Weizsäcker's formula, and our formula is 4 digits accurate. So that was very disappointing for them, but for us it was exciting because it meant that our system finds named formulas, right? It finds things that people are named for, and maybe it can find some new things. So, we can apply it to other things. So we wanted to move away from just fitting data to actually to creating dynamical models. And to create dynamical models, the idea in principle is very simple. You take time series data, you compute the derivative, and now you fit the derivatives rather than fitting the actual signal. So this is easier said than done because it's noisy and so forth. But let's say you can compute these derivatives. We now fit the derivatives. So here's an example. These are 7 equations that describe the glycolysis cycle in the cell. I didn't know what that meant either, but these look like difficult equations. We took these equations from some paper. We generated data. We added 10% noise, and we fed it into the system, and we said, find the equations. And then within about 4 hours, it comes back with these 7 differential equations, which are almost verbatim the original equations. And again, I remind you, we're not fitting the coefficients. We're really finding the entire form based on these dynamics. So these are 7 coupled nonlinear ordinary differential equations, and they're all correct except for that red term over there that's incorrect but small. So it looks like we have a really interesting thing, and of course from these equations we can almost automatically generate these kinds of charts. In other words, we can look at data and generate these charts, which people spend careers trying to generate from first principles. So if we can do that, let's see what else we can do. And I want to give you another example this is a little bit closer to the kind of mechanical engineering background. But this is a robot that flaps and hovers in the air. This is a 3D printed robot that we printed in the lab. It's about 3 grams. It hovers in place for about 90 seconds. It's stable. And it does it by flapping its wings in a vertical wave. So like a mosquito. So, people spend a lot of time trying to model this wing behavior, and it's very complicated because of the aeroelastics involved. So what we said is let's see how our system works here as well. So we basically did a high-speed video of the wing flapping. We measured the lift, we measured the angles, and we gave it to the system and said, create a dynamical system model of the lift of this wing. And I don't want to show you the results themselves. The equations themselves are interesting. But what's more interesting is how these models relate to the state of the art. So when you compare the state of the art of models in the field, I think it's useful to look at 2 dimensions, the complexity of the model and the accuracy of the model. And so there are lots of different models, some of them more accurate but complex, some of them simpler but less accurate. And there's kind of room for everybody. And indeed, if you scan the literature, there's lots of models here that people have published for aeroelastic wing lift in various situations. And you can see different levels, more complex and simpler, more accurate and less. And each dot here is somebody's career, right, and trying to create this model. So what we did here is we ran it, and the first thing that happened is that it kind of rediscovered these models in about a day. Rediscovered all of them in various degrees, and then it discovered a few more that are both simpler and more accurate. than the traditional models. And if you're wondering how that compares to fitting polynomials, here's what polynomials of various degrees end up looking on this chart. So it's interesting to see how this works and kind of look at these models and try to understand them. So I was going around giving colloquiums like this one, and I'd stop here and I would beg for data. I would say, I have data, I have models, I have this hammer, I'm looking for nails. If you have data, we'll generate equations for you, we can publish a paper together. So I was looking for data, and usually people don't like to give data, I have to say. But one guy, Gurul Sul from the University of Texas Southwestern, came and said, I have the perfect data for you. I have these, I'm doing single cell dynamics, I collect these measurements from individual cells, and maybe you can create a model that explains each of these cells. Now you have to understand, many biologists, or most, look at dynamics, if they do, of billions of cells in a big vat, and all the dynamics are kind of averaged out, and you lose a lot of the interesting details. But here, he was measuring dynamics of single cells. He had 60s of these curves, and he said, maybe you can give me the equations that describe the dynamics for all cells. And they might have different coefficients for each cell, but the equations should be identical across all cells. So it sounds like a perfect application for what we're trying to do. So we put in this data, we hit enter, we wait a week, and it comes back with these results at the top. And it kind of fits the data, but I don't know, I send it to Gurul, and he emails back and says, this is total crap. These equations are not, they're not even biological. They don't mean anything. The second order, there's no second order in chemical reactions, and it's just, it doesn't mean anything. And so we were very disappointed. We're doing something wrong here. So we thought about this and for a while, and we realized there's something wrong with the building blocks we're giving the system. So first of all, we gave it sine and cosine, which is our mechanical engineering heritage, and sine and cosine are irrelevant in biochemistry. But we're also missing some other building block. What building block are we missing? We thought about this for a long time, and then we realized we're missing time delays. Time delays are really important in biology for reasons of diffusion and things like that. So let's add in another building block, time delays. We throw in this building block, we hit enter, and bam, we get these two beautiful equations that explain the entire data set. I email these equations to Gurul, and he emails back and says, we have a problem. These are the equations we just published, and your equations are a lot simpler. They're simpler, and they're just as accurate. They're even symmetrical, whereas these equations aren't. So as far as I'm concerned, these equations must be closer to the truth. There's only one problem. We have no clue what they mean. In fact, we can't even publish it because it came back and the reviewers said, if you don't understand what they mean, you can't publish it. So we still haven't published them, and I really don't know what to do about it. In fact, I thought of giving this on the final exam and asking students to prove that these two equations are the same. But maybe they're not. They're probably not the same. So there's something going on here, and we need to understand what's going on. But importantly, these equations fit unseen data. They fit new lines of cells that were not available at the time. They really, there must be something to it, but we don't know what the meaning is. So the last episode is trying to get to this issue of meaning, trying to understand where and why things are working. So we decided to, that kind of brings me to this idea of looking for invariance. So I have to say that meaning is really important to scientists, but not to everyone. And a good example is this, data mining has been around for a long time in business. And this is a famous example. If you data mine transactions in a supermarket, people have found that people that buy diapers on Thursday evenings also buy beer. And if you're running a supermarket, you don't care why. You just move the cart with the beers next to the diapers, and you sell more. But if you're a scientist, you often want to know why. So the issue of meaning is really important. So to understand that, I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by invariant. So here's a simple pendulum. It's swinging left and right. And let's say you measure two things, angle and angular velocity of this swinging pendulum. And now you ask, what is not changing about the angle and angular velocity over time? Is the ratio constant? No. Is there some constant? No. What is not changing about angle and angular velocity over time? Can anybody try to guess? Total energy, perfect. So the particular equation that sums up the kinetic and the potential energy of this thing is not changing, a close approximation for this particular pendulum. So the interesting thing is that if we get the expression for the invariant, the conservation of the system, we get the equation for the total energy, also known as the Hamiltonian of a pendulum. And that equation, as any physicist will tell you, tells you everything you want to know about this pendulum. Its dynamics, its period, the fact that it has bifurcation, it's all there. Everything about why the pendulum behaves the way it does is in this conservation law. So if we can only find invariants for dynamical systems instead of fitting the trajectories, we'll be able to get closer to the meaning. So that's really simple because the nice thing about evolutionary algorithms is that it's very easy to change the goal of what the thing is searching for. Instead of searching for equations that minimize RMS error, let's say, over the data, we now are going to look for expressions that are roughly constant across the entire data set. It's really easy to define. We change the fitness criteria, we hit enter, and we wait. We wait a day, two, we wait a week. Finally, the result comes in. We gather around, the screen blinks, and the answer comes. It's invariant. This is constant is invariant across the entire data set. This function always returns the same thing no matter what the angle and angular velocity is across the entire data set. So it's what we asked for, but it's not what we wanted. So we go back and one student in the corner of the room seeing this says, it's easy to fix. Let's just add the penalty for not using the variable. So it really will encourage it to use some more of the variables. We hit enter again, we wait another week, the screen blinks, and we get this answer. This number is also constant. We got other constants, not just 42. We got a couple of different answers, but they're all totally useless. So what do we do? So another student comes in and said, I have an idea. What we're going to do is I have this library that can eliminate these trivialities and then penalize it if it's just a constant. So we want to see if it really needs to use the variable in a meaningful way. So we add that in. It's another week of coding. It runs 100 times slower. We run it again. We wait a long time. And finally, the screen blinks, and we get this answer. This is a little bit more sophisticated. It's not exactly a constant. It's as close to a constant as you want. It's not, you can't prove that this is not using the variable in a meaningful way, but it's still useless. So what do we do? So seeing that we can't solve this, I decided to give it as homework. So I give it as homework in my evolution class, and one student, Michael Schmidt, comes back and says, it's easy. All you have to do is compute the derivatives of your time series, and you compute the relative derivatives, dx, dy, dy, dx, and for a given function, you can compute df dx, df dy for candidate function f, and from the ratios between these, you get dx dy, dy dx as well. And the difference between these is your error, and if it's in the true invariant, you get the right result. And the system cannot cheat. It has to find the correct invariant, and he hands in the correct answers for the 3 homework questions. Here are the real data sets, and here are the answers. So seeing that this worked, we really tried it in a couple other things. Here's a Physics 101 air cart swinging back and forth, and we collect the data with a webcam watching that red sticker, and we collect the data here, and we ask what's not changing. Well, this is not changing, and that's the Hamiltonian of an oscillator. The Lagrangian also comes out because that formulation also gives you Lagrangians. We run it again on a pendulum made of chewing gum on a string, and again we get the Hamiltonian Lagrangian of a pendulum. We kick it up a notch and run it on a double oscillator, 2 carts with 3 springs, and you look at this green and red curves and you ask what is not changing. Well, this is not changing, and it is the kind of Hamiltonian for that. And we then tried it on the mother of chaotic systems, the double pendulum. The webcam watches this for a while, and 32 cores analyze it for a day. And this is what the data looks like. So what is not changing about these 4 variables over time? Lots of things are not changing. For one, there's the Hamiltonian at the top of a double pendulum, which does require quite a bit of knowledge to do. And it created this from without any prior knowledge in physics, physics, kinematics, and so forth. It also said in parts of the swing, this is not changing over here, and this is the conservation of momentum at the high energy swings. And also, by the way, F equal ma and other things. So you get all these kind of interesting insights by running this just on the pendulum. So I showed you 2 examples. One when we look at physics and mechanics, another one we look at biology. Of course, one of the questions is, are there invariants in biology? And indeed, there are interesting things, and we find these really interesting invariants in these biological dynamics, but we don't know what they mean. And we're still trying to publish these and see where it can go. All right, so at this point, we published these results. There's a lot of excitement, and we started getting lots of emails. And all the emails said basically the same thing. They said, I have data. I need to graduate. Please find something in my data. And we realized we're the bottleneck of graduation of a lot of people. And so we released a software. It's called Eureka, spelt with a Q, misspelt with a Q, so that you can find it on Google. It looked like a spreadsheet. You paste your data. You give variable names to the columns. And then you can issue queries on your data, like I'm looking for a function z that predicts z as a function of x and y. Or maybe I'm looking for a function that's an invariant of these strings. Or maybe I'm looking for a differential equation that measures how these things progress and so forth. So you issue these queries, and you get a set of simple equations, a handful of equations on this Pareto front of complexity and accuracy. Some equations are complex and more accurate, some simpler but less accurate. And you can look at these, and usually using some domain knowledge, you can sift through it and get some idea of what's going on. But increasingly, people don't even want to punch these in. They don't want to issue queries. All they really want is just one button. So we're going to add that soon, so that you really don't have to think at all, and you just paste your data and you get your graduation. So a lot of people are using this in lots of different ways. A lot of big data and small data, a lot of citizen science, people using it. This is a radon detection person who improved detection quality, approximation for these complicated welding calculations. People use it to simplify equation by taking an equation, generating data, and then searching for a simpler equation, and they can simplify and find approximations fast. People improving the detection accuracy 5-fold in particle accelerators by doing distortion correction. People are doing classification using this method, creating models that are not deterministic but stochastic by adding stochastic building blocks. There's also creating not deterministic models but stochastic models using reaction models, and lots of different ways. But one of the really interesting things is that if you think about it for a while, forget about the whole rest of it, and just look at these equations and the data and forget about everything else. You can think of these small set of equations as a genome of a data set that describes that entire data set very compactly. And if you think about it that way, you can start connecting all the data sets by similarity. So we started crawling the web to find out how different data sets are connected. And you might want to upload your data set and find out that you're located somewhere here, and which data sets are similar to you, and maybe they are in different disciplines, yet doing similar kind of analysis. All right, so we know that evolution can't write Shakespeare, but it's interesting that it can find Hamiltonians. It's very counterintuitive. People have said lots of different things about this whole area of automating science. Chris Anderson, editor of Wired, famously said correlation is enough. Faced with massive data, scientific method is becoming obsolete. This is a paper on the end of science. I disagree. I think the data that we have will accelerate science in our ability to generate models in different ways. The New York Times said about this, theoretical physicists are not yet obsolete, but scientists have taken steps towards replacing themselves. And I think that's also wrong. I was very careful to show you that humans are still needed to decide what variables to collect, what building blocks to use, and if we use the wrong building blocks, we get garbage. And finally, how to assign meaning to the results. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hod. We have time for some questions. Well, I have one. I have a model that's chaotic, and it's very similar to the Lorentz oscillator. And I wondered if you actually applied this to those particular sets of.
Yeah, we've applied to the Lorentz oscillators quite a bit. We're actually trying to now not only do the Lorentz system, but also do it not knowing about some of the variables. Mm-hmm. So in other words, identify hidden systems, but absolutely it works for that as well. In fact, what's rather unintuitive is that the more chaotic the system it is, the easier it is to find these invariants, because chaotic systems are very rich in information. Mm-hmm. Every experiment gives you a lot of information over the phase space. The most difficult systems are systems that are regulated such that they have long plateaus where they're not changing. And that's really difficult to identify. So biological systems often are self-regulated, and it's difficult to extract information. But the chaotic systems are fairly transparent in the information they provide.
There's another kind of data that I work with, which is ultimately from plasma physics. And we extract data from the radar that is essentially sound waves. And so I'm wondering if you have the ability to extract what I guess I would call dispersion relations for waves.
Yeah, so there is one student who's working now on creating partial differential equations rather than ordinary differential equations. So again, you'd have time series for different points in space, and you want to know what are the governing equations, and I think that could help there as well. So I think so we can't do it right now, but that's definitely something that would be very useful.
Yes, right over here.
What if your data can be collected on a time scale which is comparable to the time that it takes you to generate a model, so that you might have a model, there's some potential for it to be contradicted by data that comes in later.
Yeah.
Would the same kind of process allow proposing new experiments?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's actually pretty ideal, because so we have one experiment going on now with University of Vanderbilt where it's running on data, generating lots of models, and then designing a new experiment, remotely controlling the experimental system at another university. It's doing the experiments, coming back with new data. Then it's redoing the modeling, coming up with a new experiment, and so forth. Exactly. So that's the real automated scientist, when it's not just using data to generate models and doing this coevolution, but it's also evolving new physical experiments. And I think it's a lot more efficient than doing high throughput experiments where you just scan a whole set of parameters and hope the answer is there. This is when the complexity of the experiment is high and when the experiment is expensive, that's probably the way to go.
Yes, question.
You were saying that symbolic regression goes to the 90s, but the thing that this immediately connects from to me, right, is mathematical formula discovery with automated mathematician, which is Lanat in the 70s.
All right, so that's a very different approach. It's much more deductive in the way it produces the new things, and I think that's also the That's for mathematical proofs. It's finding finding proofs, I think, and finding corollaries and things like that, not fitting equations from data. It's not data-driven.
Well, actually, it is, right? It was followed up with heuristic, which is a more general, logic or programming approach. And that was kind of the conclusion of these systems is this is what you can discover is whatever is in the data, right? You put in your elementary formula, things for matching data, and then you can do as much discovery as you want, and the limits is just how much data you want. And that was the conclusion in the 80s, right?
Josh, perhaps?
Do you plan to apply the symbolic methods back to the control systems problems that you kind of started with at the beginning?
Yes, that would be a good idea. I mean, so once you have these equations, you can use them for lots of things. You can use them for optimization. You can use them for prediction. You can use them for control. You can use them for lots of different things, and absolutely. So one of the advantages of having a compressed expression is that you can use lots of existing techniques to design controllers, as well as computational techniques to do it a lot faster because it's a compact model. So we haven't done that, but absolutely.
You had a question in the middle? Yes.
Do you think you can do something like this for robots to develop actual theories and concepts? For example, maybe the Big Bang or something like that, other than mathematical models and capabilities?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think that if we look at what humans can do and what machines can do, one of the things that what you're talking about, new concepts, is probably a bit higher level than finding mathematical equations. So, this process can, let's say, identify motifs. If you don't give it sine and cosine, it can find certain motifs that begin to appear and reappear and call them sine and cosines and discover that. But let's say going from deterministic to stochastic, that's a higher level concept that's difficult for something like this to do. So I think at this point, these machines cannot generate entirely new frameworks. And that's where really humans will still lead. But I think that's a really good next thing to try to formalize.
Last question, Jenny.
From human perspective, we all know humans are using a lot of neural networks, which are more or less a lot of small nodes here and there, and they are connected by these synapses. And for example, those are computational neural network people, they just use this, for example, feed-forward multi-layer perceptron. Then they don't even assume any kind of potential model, but they are still doing nonlinear regression. So they dump the input and the output, and then everything are kind of learn through those synapses connection weights. Then finally, they have that model, even though they cannot interpret that model, but they are able to use that model for any kind of control task, classification, regression task. And you can even take derivative of that model for a lot of application. Why do we really need to condense to the specific formula? Why not we just use that neural network idea where a lot of distributed nodes, and eventually still we can get the task done.
Yeah, so I think, so why not use neural networks? Well, I think the main difference is that the equation may offer some insight into the physics. And that, I think, is very important. So if you're really only interested in prediction, sure, you can use support vector machines and neural networks. But if you're interested in perhaps understanding, for example, the equation of the double pendulum is insightful. And so many scientists really want to understand the equation, not to mention also that it's quicker to evaluate than a neural network. But it also gives insight, and I think that's the main difference.
If some of you'd like to come down after we release the room here, that's fine. We do have a little more time for questions. But I'd like very much to thank our speaker, Hod Lipson.
Thank you.